Hello and welcome to this session on the future of payment systems and how they can help you improve your business performance. My name is Heather Ramsden, and as some of you might know, I'm the editor of Vending International, and with me today is the experienced team from Ingenico Enterprise Retail. Firstly, we have Darren Anderson, UK Business Development Manager, and he'll be supported by Lee Jones, UK Director of Sales and Business Development. Now, between them, they have all the necessary expertise in the area of payment systems, and they will be imparting some of their knowledge to you today, as well as introducing you to some of Ingenico's latest innovations. So I'll hand over to Darren and Lee now, but of course feel free to jot down your questions as we proceed, and they will either deal with them at the end of the session or as we go along. So with that, over to you, Darren.
Thanks very much, Heather, and hello everyone. Very nice to be speaking to you today, assuming we're all probably sat comfortably at home at the moment. But it's very happy to see such a large amount of people joining us, so thank you very much. Real pleasure to speak with you today. We'll start off just with some brief introductions with myself and Lee. I'll ask Lee, first of all, if you'd like to give us a brief introduction.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Darren. So good morning, everyone. My name's Lee Jones. I've been with Ingenico for over 14 years. This has actually been spread over 2 separate stints with the company. I actually originally joined when chip and PIN was first introduced into the UK. And from my side, I've seen a big evolution of cashless and contactless technology adoption over this period. I've also been involved and worked on initiatives linked to back to 2012 when the London Olympics came to the UK, where there was a real focus around contactless at the time. And certainly from my perspective, in terms of my role now as the commercial lead for retail sales and what we call new vertical markets in the UK, which covers vending. Vending for me is one of the most challenging industries I see, because you never face to face with the end customer. So this is something I know is a challenge for many, and something that Ingenico we're looking to try and sort of help people work through and embrace. Darren, back across to yourself.
Thanks, Lee. And myself, much shorter tenure with Ingenico than Lee, it has to be said. So about 9 or 10 months with the business now. I come from broadly an information security background. Very recently working with companies like NCC and Dell SecureWorks. Very familiar with a lot of the risk and compliance and security challenges that go along with payments. And as Lee touched on, we have a specific division now focused on our self-service market, and actually vending is a key part of that. So my work has been specifically focused around our self-service or unattended payment solutions, and looking forward to sharing a bit more today about some of the trends and high-level industry information we want to share, and as Lee touched on, we'll mention a little bit about Ingenico's approach, of course, as well. So just moving on to, I should say as well, of course, if there are any questions that you have, I believe you have the facility, of course, to kind of post those. I think Heather will be collecting those, so do feel free to post questions as and when you see fit, and at the end of the session, we'll certainly pick up as best we can on as many of those as we can. We have an agenda here. Obviously, we'll carry on with a bit of an introduction on the business, as well as what you've heard from Lee and I, and then we're looking at obviously cashless itself as a trend within self-service, specifically some information around vending, and as we say, touching on what we do within self-service. So just first of all, I think it's wise just to give you a flavour for Ingenico. I know from when I joined the business, I was familiar with the name, but one of these brand names you see almost subconsciously every day, and whether you're booking a ticket in a train station or in a retail, a large retail store. We're a global business, focused, 100% on payments. You can see on the slide there, giving you an overview of that sort of global reach and really large reach and scale that we have.
Yeah, I think just really probably just to add to that, effectively, and what this says is that we've got lots of people doing lots of stuff in lots of different places. But the most important thing, as Darren has touched on, is that, we're focused absolutely on cashless payments. That is what our business is, interested in. That's where we spend our time. And just to complement a little bit further, just some of the points that are there, we are the #1 provider of secure payment terminals in the UK and globally. Typically if you go out shopping at the weekend, you go out for a bite to eat, typically you will see, well, obviously when you're allowed to go out for a bite to eat, you will have at least a 50-50 chance of using and seeing Ingenico technology when you come to pay. In terms of, my time with the company, I've seen a lot of change. We've evolved significantly as a business from being an organisation that was focused pretty much exclusively on providing payment terminals and, hardware services related to those, whereas now we've evolved so that we're able to provide everything from not just a terminal, but the acquiring element, the managed service for processing both cardholder present and card not present or e-commerce transactions, and many other bits in between. The one thing that, for me, that, I'm proud of and my team are, is just the trust that people place in us every day, both from existing customers and new customers who want us to look after their transaction processing for them. It's something we don't take for granted. It's something, for me, that, should be invisible in terms of, payments and the technology from an end shopper perspective. You've got to make sure that revenue and data are both, and arguably in equal importance, made secure. But that trust for me is really key, and that's a big part of what underpins our growth. The customers we've had for many years remain customers, and at the same time, we're growing our footprint and customer base both in existing markets and new markets. But that trust piece for me is absolutely key.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. And you can see that as well as some of the kind of high-level numbers. You can see some of the information we've provided there around vending, and we have a long history in self-service and in vending, various forms. But I think, as Lee touched on there, what's really exciting and most interesting now is that, both as we'll come on to with some of the slides, the market's changing, the needs, consumer experience and demands change all the time, and the ways of paying change. And I think as a global organisation with, a very scalable, robust platform where, as Lee said, many, very large merchants as well as small and medium-sized merchants transact with us. I think there's a lot of assurance there in the kind of scale and reliability of that platform and inherent in delivering that kind of service. So we'll come on to expand on some of this. So let's talk a little bit about cashless. First of all, within vending, I'm sure a lot of you, whether it's with Vender Vending International or the EVA or the EVA, and so many organisations that do support and provide really useful data about the vending market. We've pulled some here from the likes of UK Finance, but I think what's absolutely clear is that there's whichever way you kind of cut it up, depending on what numbers you may slice and dice, the percentages are high for the continued growth of payments made with cards, and indeed, in terms of the overall share of contactless is increasing as well, currently around 65%. And of course, we also know that new methods, particularly around wallets, mobile wallets, smartphones, is also increasing steadily as well. And, we'll come on to talk about why some of those trends may indeed accelerate, particularly after, what we're going through at the moment, and what should be a legacy. Looking at things like hygiene as well will also impact the market. So, these trends, we'll go on to talk a little bit more about those. In terms of the evolution, we probably won't spend too much time on what was going on 8,000 years ago. I'm not so sure we want to spend too much time there, but the kind of system of cash replacement, if you like, alternatives to cash. It goes back a very long way, shall we say. But what's most pertinent for us, of course, is looking at the more recent timeline. Things like the PayPal launch in 2000 being huge. The first contactless cards issued in the UK, 2007. And you can see on the timeline there some other sort of key milestones in the development of cashless and contactless.
Yeah, I think from my side, in terms of cashless payments evolution, I certainly remember when chip and PIN was launched in the UK, and how retailers in particular were very resistant to its introduction. When I sort of think back, there was a lot of challenge around the adoption of cashless, and certainly chip and PIN on the high street, where the view was that fraud was low, and so why spend a lot of money on new technology to address a challenge that a lot of people just felt didn't exist, or at least some people didn't anyway. I have to say I can fondly remember many conversations with frustrated IT directors on this theme. But ultimately, obviously, now if you see where we are today, chip and PIN is obviously everywhere, and we're starting to see contactless come through also, and a lot of momentum behind it. I do remember a point with, regards to contactless, and to try and encourage the faster adoption. There was one point in time, when I think back several years ago, where merchants were actually offered incentives. And the reason behind that was that, the less people use cash and the more people used, cashless technology, then the better for many organizations who provide parts of the value chain when it comes to processing cashless transactions. And as I mentioned earlier, when I touched on, about London 2012, that for me in particular was a real big step change from, a contactless perspective, because around that event there was a big concentration of activity. It was, used to, try out solutions in different parts of, London. So we saw contactless technology installed into taxis for the first time in London. We saw it obviously being introduced onto vending machines, and most shops actually within the M25 area also had to have and got support to put in place contactless acceptance technology. And then basically since then it has grown and grown. Key drivers for growth and around adoption have been, for me, when TfL moved across to allow people to pay initially with their Oyster cards when they were trying to move from one part of London to another, and that saw a huge spike in awareness. It showed people, a way of using this new means of transacting, and got people comfortable with this new method of payment. And then following on from that, and probably about 2 years afterwards, we were involved in many projects with the UK supermarkets where, they have really the highest, transaction volumes, the highest peaks, and, and potentially also the biggest queues as well. So, once they got behind contactless, for me, those were key milestones as we really started to see adoption, awareness and use, but also familiarity from a user perspective, and confidence grow at the same time, such that contactless really has never looked back. And now, obviously, from our perspective, there's even more opportunity to embrace this. But, for organisations who operate, not just in the vending space, but other organisations who are really looking at how can we put out self-service technology and deliver a user experience that really aligns with what the customer expects and pretty much is now starting to demand, and making the most of that and actually being able to cater for that demand is critical for businesses moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. And I think, we've seen, in fact, on the next slide, we talk about some of those other trends. But just to close off here, we've obviously seen some recent developments as well, just kind of backing up and promoting, if you like, more use, like the cashless limit increase, the contactless limit increase to £45. And, you have people like the, let's say, Barclaycard CEO who, were very clear that deploying that higher contactless threshold is a real benefit right now, where, we want to promote more contactless, less cash handling, there are those concerns from the hygiene side, but as has always been the case, there are efficiencies and revenue savings and increases indeed to be made with this, and we'll come on to that now. So just to develop on that, then, when we think about why move to cashless or increase your use of cashless, I think many in vending, of course, will already have deployed some systems like this, or some will be starting to think about it. I think what we see across the industry is that there's an acceptance or a realization, really, that both from a user's point of view and indeed for the operator, it can really ease operationally the interactions with the machine, the user experience. It's faster, and I think particularly in terms of the operators and the cost and time you spend with CoinMet, and obviously the collection and management of those systems is more onerous than we find with cashless. And of course, you're opening up your market, given the different types of cards, international users that can interact with the machine, compared to when you have simply a cash payment option.
Yeah, and I think as well, that sort of convenience for users, for shoppers, Apple Pay has obviously grown in use, and people are becoming more comfortable with it. I think we're starting to see obviously new technologies around cashless take hold as people start to become more and more relaxed and paying for physical pay. I think as Aaron's touched on, certainly my experience has been that there's a lot of retailers in particular around cost savings, efficiencies, not having a risk and security and cost associated with moving and handling cash. But also as well, I've spoken to a few sort of vendors operating themselves. One of the challenges people are faced is that actually in some locations where vending machines are tighter, it's difficult to even, keep sales at a steady level, as opposed to even managing to increase sales on machines. And I think, for those machines that are in high footfall locations that just don't have cashless capability, I think that challenge is going to get increasingly big as customers start to carry, increasingly less cash. They're going to look at what is the easiest, simplest, and most frictionless way of buying, the goods that they want to get their hands on. And a lot of, vending purchases can certainly be impulse buying. And if you don't allow people to have that, simple, smooth experience paying the way they want to pay, then you're going to miss sales, you're going to lose sales, and generating a return on investment for the cost associated with cycling machines. The service at a certain location is only going to increase in terms of business challenge for organizations.
Thanks, Lee. Hopefully it was just me. The audio did seem to deteriorate a little bit there, Lee. I was struggling a little bit, but maybe the audience or Heather can let us know if there was any audio issues for the audience. But
yeah, there was a slightly obscured, so I'm not sure what that's about. But let's carry on and see what happens.
Sure, we'll let you know, Lee, the next time if the audio seems a bit clearer. But hopefully most people did pick up most there. I could hear mostly. And just to develop on some of that, I think some of the interesting, as I've been going around the market as such, speaking to a lot of the UK and indeed European organisations in vending at various levels. Some of the other interesting pieces we see is around, certainly very firm numbers indicating, that consumer spend goes up, average spend per sale typically is going up around about 6% with contactless. And, that replacement of cash, we touched on, and apologies if, Lee may have mentioned some of this and I didn't quite pick up the audio, but it's worth highlighting that obviously the cash counting, coin collecting comes at a cost, both in time and, operational cost. And indeed, does all of it finally get banked. And so, there are these traditional challenges with cash, which of course don't go away, and contactless cashless approaches help minimise that, shall we say, if you're not even fully replacing. And indeed, another interesting point is that what we see is that cashless acceptance doesn't have to cannibalise your cash sales, but in many cases we do see that it actually boosts them. The cashless technology can actually drive particularly low-performing machines on a sort of percentage basis, and complementing, the cash acceptance. So, we don't see necessarily a decrease in real terms, if we can put it that way, in the cash, but certainly an important addition to, opening up an extra revenue channel, as well as maintaining, as you see fit, cash payments. So yeah, we see that the cashless trend, as you can see there, probably around about 25% of the base is employed cashless, but the actual use is much higher. So I think there's definitely still some catching up to be done in much of the self-service world, and understanding and deploying the right cashless solution. Let's look a little bit more at that now. So specifically looking at self-service and retail, I think it's worth just adding that although we understand that in many ways vending has been a leader really in terms of the market beginning to understand the kind of pros and cons of that unattended selling model, and of course there can be some challenges. Lee touched on at the start. There's a very specific set of circumstances, of course, when you're not interacting with your customers. So refining and improving the service and making it as personal as you can is definitely a direction of travel within self-service. And although vending, I think, created a lot of that landscape where we started to understand how you can collect that data and analyse and assess what works and what doesn't in unattended. Of course, it's not just vending where we see the different approaches. And within Genico, we are across so many verticals and sectors to look at various types of solutions that we learn from different areas. So, you think about areas like electrical vehicle charging, in-store self-service. You can see the burger sellers example there. We have transport, of course, which drives a lot of innovation and movement in the kind of self-service approach.
Yeah, and I know some of you just said that you couldn't hear me before, so I'm hoping I'm a little bit clearer.
Much better. Much better.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So all I was really trying to touch on before was just to talk and basically draw attention to the fact, for me, cashless is very much around convenience. It's making sure that when customers want to, buy something, that you cater for their needs. I've spoken to vending operators in the past where they've said that for some machines that are located in certain areas, it can be a big challenge to get a machine to break even, let alone try and grow sales from it. And my view is, as we see, the use of cashless increasing, people are starting to carry less money around from a physical perspective, and particularly obviously with the outbreak and the way things are right now in the outside world. For me, actually being able to deliver a cashless experience is going to become increasingly critical, and particularly for machines that are sited in high footfall locations. I think, if people don't actually listen and embrace that, I think it will start to put at risk, the investments people are having to make in actually securing prime locations, actually getting customers to buy. A lot of customers use vending machines as well, can typically approach them from an impulse purchase perspective. And there's nothing more frustrating that, if you're both an operator and even a customer, that, the customer wants to buy something, they're not able to get it because they've not got the money. And obviously from an operator or a location owner perspective, those are lost sales, it's lost revenue and lost margin. People are now starting to embrace, new technologies. So we're seeing more and more people using things that we term as wearables. So, I've even got a couple of people in my team who have contactless rings. So, they're able now not just to use a contactless card or even Apple Pay on their phone. They can actually even sometimes walk into a shop, pick up some food and almost wave their hand across the top of the device, which actually can be a bit disconcerting for the person behind the till, but it just shows how, technology is moving on and how simple payments are starting to become. And it's that sort of convenience and simplicity that will determine, which machines succeed and which ones don't, because the general public and the people using, retail outlets, self-service technology, probably have an increasingly lower patience threshold, and it's very quick that you'll see them, just go, I can't be bothered with this, I'm just going to move on. So for me, those are key points that people absolutely need to be considering. And I think the other part for me as well around this is that, it's okay to support cashless technology, but what you've got to make sure as well is that, it's secure, making sure that those transactions and that card data is absolutely secure and not at risk of being compromised. Those are key things that also need to be taken into account, because every day someone approaches a machine, it's a chance to wow or dismay, a user from both a purchase experience perspective, but also from a brand perspective for, the company that's actually cited the machine and whose products are actually on display too.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. And I think, the security point is clearly a very important one from, a real-world security. So, are you protecting your own assets? And of course, supporting that are the compliance and regulations that we probably are all quite familiar with, such as the payment card industry standards. Without going into great depth on that, of course, there are different ways of approaching these standards, but essentially, it is key to sort of underline that contactless payments are safe and secure. Much of the same protections as chip and pen, safer than magnetic stripe. Contactless cards typically embedded with layers of security to protect against fraud. So, you have to be within a few centimeters of the terminal, and it's extremely difficult to intercept that kind of data in use. So, I think that is an important point, because, security, not just data, but obviously in terms of your assets, your cash, your transactions, all coming into sharper focus. And, I've noticed as a ex-information security person, shall we say, I think this is only even more highlighted now with some of the, shall we say, novel ways that the bad guys are looking to compromise things, coming out of, basically disasters such as we're kind of going through. It all puts a little bit of extra stress and strain onto managing the kind of business ecosystem, and I think contactless helps reduce a lot of risk there too. So yeah, I think we've, just to highlight again as well, I think one of the words that we used earlier in terms of frictionless, removing that friction, speed, these are absolutely key in highlighting the benefits as well of cashless. And, within self-service, whether that's going to a machine and you just want a quick and easy experience to get your product, or whether you're in a station booking a ticket, I think as time moves on, speed and ease of that transaction is, everyone's going to be looking to refine and improve that, and that's what consumers are demanding. And just to develop on that a little bit, we know that the payment solution is one piece of it, but certainly, for many of you in vending, we'll be looking at new products, new kiosks, and I think that a modern, safe, secure, intelligent, contactless, cashless payment options naturally complements that. So certainly in my experience of speaking to many in the vending community, it's worth adding that there are many who see the developments go hand in hand. Really, you don't want to be actually putting out an intelligent touchscreen machine with an old coin mech on it, I guess. So, that onboard compute and the ever developing, modernising kind of aspect of the kiosks and vending machines themselves, the payment systems need to complement that. And also within self-service, the innovation that it's driving doesn't show any signs of slowing, and certainly within Ingenico, we've got dedicated R&D that runs along with that and looks at the payment piece. So I think that vending will continue to lead the charge in many ways, particularly when it comes to the kind of hardware and that user experience. But always good to look at what some of the other industries and verticals are doing, as we touched on. And certainly for many of you, you'll be familiar with the Amazon Go and kind of micro markets, the rise of this area of business. And yes, it's an innovation, but as we've touched on, some of this has already been seen in different areas of business. But of course, essentially, as many in vending will know, what this does is, replacing attended stores where, the cost of labour, for one thing, is something that, can be looked at. And the micro market industry is, I think, up to over $1 billion in revenue, certainly going back, a year or so now. And we're starting to see more and more of that, particularly in business and employment areas within the UK too.
Yeah, and I think from my side, I think we're seeing, more and more authorities, organisations, people involved in payments, encouraging the use of electronic payments as a safer measure. We've seen statements coming out saying time to swap your coins for payments cards. Safer for containing obviously things like the coronavirus at the moment. We've obviously seen transaction limits as well increase. In terms of things like contactless, and obviously we see more and more self-service growth opportunities coming through as well, because the less time people have to physically almost interact with one another, the better in this sort of current world and possibly new world moving forward. So there's definitely going to be a place where we see kiosks perhaps appearing where they weren't previously. I think there's going to be more opportunity, more acceptance of certain types of self-service technology than perhaps there were before. And I think, again, it's making sure that when people are faced with new ways of doing things, that absolutely the way a customer is educated and made aware of how to interact is also taken into account. So little things like, if I'm about to pay for something, how do I know exactly where on a self-service machine to insert or present my card? Can you, do that by perhaps lighting up different parts of the machine to grab the shopper's attention so that they're able to understand very quickly and clearly where to look to and what to do next? So it's little things like that. So I think there will be more innovation with self-service kiosks. I think there will be more self-service deployments coming around and being put in place, and perhaps in areas where we wouldn't ordinarily expect them. And certainly speaking to one or two of the sort of more high street brands that we deal with, they've got some really quite interesting concepts around this. We've also, at Ingenico as well, been doing some experimentation with things like robots, where somebody could interact with a robot at maybe the front of a physical location and actually have any goods and services that they've actually purchased brought to that particular place, rather than having the shopper to navigate through, a congested, shop to the back of the facility to be able to make a payment, and then, reducing hopefully the amount of contact they come into with other people, reducing the risk that they see. So self-service we see certainly has been an area where it's going to grow both in vending, but more broadly, and I think as it grows in other areas in addition to vending as well, that will just breed familiarity, it will breed education and awareness, and people will become increasingly comfortable using these types of machines, and hopefully that will see an uplift in sales for everybody concerned.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. That's a great point, the last one. I mean, I think the the kind of abandoned purchase that many in vending are, always looking to avoid. Again, it's, that ease and predictability and familiarity, as Lee says, I think it's absolutely key. We can expect that, the kind of population generally are, all moving in this direction. And indeed, we think about some other regions. I mean, we think about the Nordics, and, as we've spoken to some of our client base over there, I mean, they expect to be, fully contactless card using by, I think it's 2023, or at least a very, very small percentage of the population still using cash. And, it is a regional thing to some degree, but I think, they're often forward thinking and a little bit ahead of some other regions. So, it's good to look over the water as such to a lot of the examples we see in the Nordics as well, where this is being borne out. So moving on to a little look at some of the other hot topics, if you like, and trends within vending. I think certainly the renewed or heightened focus about hygiene, I don't think it can be kind of stated too much. I cannot see the legacy of much of what we've gone through kind of dissipating. I think that consumers and businesses are going to be all the more conscious and aware of how they're doing things, and how things are deployed, and how they're asking people to interact with their business. So, we've made the point about contactless in that regard, but I can only see a kind of ripple effect really coming from that, where we'll start to see more impact in other areas of business, both in terms of optimizing how things are done, but, really putting that kind of hygiene factor as a key point. And as the slide goes on to say, with payments, and again, coming from a security background, this really, resonates with me, that particularly as we move forward and perhaps things reshape to some degree, one thing that won't go away is the, exactly as it says, the reliability, the value, the security and protection that you get from your payments provider is absolutely fundamental. It's so key to your business. You need that reach and assurance that you've got the right partner there with such a critical part of your business. That we expect those conversations and the questions we'll be getting asked will become that bit more pointed, really. And then, of course, another hot topic right now is strong customer authentication. So there's a bit to be decided within that. And indeed, we have active groups, looking at this with UK Finance and further afield to sort of understand the implications and where this will go, and specifically what it will mean for vending. And, I understand there are still ongoing conversations, but what this, comes down to again is, how will that be implemented, and how will vendors and their payment providers react to that? So just to touch on it very briefly, for those maybe not so familiar, SCA is going to ask more questions of users and operators when it asks for a level of authentication. So whether that's after a set number of contactless transactions, around 5, or a financial limit, it's going to ask users to authenticate, to enter a PIN. That can naturally be a problem in self-service. There's various solutions, certainly that we're looking at and already down the road with, whether that's a PIN-on glass option for contactless readers or other pieces. But I think all I would say right now on that is that, it's a great example of where, regulations and kind of dictated or mandated procedures require the operator and the payment provider to react and meet that challenge. And certainly something Ingenico will be looking very, very closely at. And we've touched on it already, and the future with AI, robotics, Internet of Things. A lot of that will of course come to the fore in vending, and many of you will already be kind of ahead of the curve in some ways, and just understanding the kind of power and need of good communication with machines as well as people to optimize operations.
Yeah, I think the strong card holder, customer authentication piece is a challenge for many industries, not just sort of vending, which is where obviously at the end of a certain number of transactions that have been performed using contactless, there's a requirement to physically enter a PIN. Now that's great if you've got the capability for someone to be able to do that on a machine or at a shop or in a restaurant. But in some instances where it's contactless only, that clearly presents a challenge. So there are discussions ongoing around that. There were some dates set in stone around when this must be adopted that have since been softened a little bit. And the main reason it's been put in place is from a secure perspective, just to make sure that if somebody does have their card stolen, that it does help prevent a fraudster taking that card and going away and completing an unlimited amount of contactless transactions, and particularly with the limit going up now, that actually in some ways could become more attractive to the criminal fraternity. So the logic behind it is good in terms of controlling that potential for risk, exposure and loss, but the actual way it gets managed operationally and in real life is something of a challenge that organisations like ourselves and many others have to work and find our way through with the different merchants that we deal with. But for sure, it's not going to go away. It's something that absolutely will come, but it's been able to make sure that that customer experience is not negatively damaged or not so damaged because people want to buy something but just can't because of this new way of doing things, and a machine only has a contactless reader actually embedded into it. So there's a bit of work to be done around that, but as Darren touched on, it's something that's there for the right reasons. And I think when we talk about things like artificial intelligence, robotics, and things like that, and people now starting to use chatbots if you're ever online and need some help when it comes to buying something or trying to find out some information, this stuff is clearly coming through. It's going to be, I think, several years before we see true AI really taking apart from a payment perspective for sure. But like I said, we've seen through our laboratories team, so we actually have a group of people who are unburdened by having a P&L, which is quite a nice thing for them, I'm sure. And it's a team made up of people who work in commercial, marketing, product, and sort of legal functions, and have got experience across those areas. And they look out, 3 to 5 years at disruptive technologies and what's going to come next. And these, people have started to look at the use of robotics, as I mentioned. But again, I think we're some way off seeing that sort of thing really come across into the self-service industry for sure.
Great, thanks, Lee. Just coming to the last kind of couple of slides. Hopefully, we'll leave a bit of time for taking on a couple of questions. So, I promise you, we did not want to make this into any kind of sales presentation. So we're just going to. It is incumbent on me, however, to make sure I underline the fact that we're not just talking about this out of interest. We actually have, an active involvement in the industry, and indeed, touched on a lot of development in future services and products. But, there, you can see some of the numbers around our existing involvement, and many of you may know us through partners, if not direct, in the self-service world, be that vending, parking, EVT, transport. But I think it's very reassuring for our clients that we have a dedicated division within self-service, and given many of the regional and industry kind of trends and challenges that we touched on today, I think it's absolutely key that an organisation like Ingenico continues as we are to develop our self-service business unit so that we're familiar with those challenges and trends, and obviously bringing service solutions to market that help and meet those.
Yeah, and
just sorry.
Obviously too keen to speak, Darren. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So we've obviously, and from a, just putting solutions to one side just for a minute, from our perspective, we've got a huge amount of experience in our business. People who've seen, and been involved with payments for over 20 years. One of the things, there's a couple of things that for me are sort of like takeaways is that, cutting corners, taking risks, trying to do things, on the cheap, it is something people absolutely, in my opinion, should avoid. The pain that can be caused if you don't take a step back, look at things in detail, can be so big. If you end up with a solution that proves to be not reliable and not quick, not smooth, then the damage on revenue, the damage on reputation can be huge. We also, as well, when talking to customers, we also say just take a step back. Payments is one part of the overall checkout or payment experience, and just looking at how you map that out in terms of the point when someone approaches a machine, right the way through to the point when the goods have been dispensed. It's just looking at that sort of flow, testing it, trying different ideas and different thoughts around it, because the better, quicker and smoother it can be, and the less steps in it for the customer, the more likely you are to have a more successful deployment, higher revenue, higher profit, and just a better overall experience is then delivered for the customer. So I think that concludes the presentation, unless Darren has anything else you want to touch on in terms of hardware.
just to close off, I'm just going to put a little teaser up there, just to sort of close off the Ingenico piece is just to say that what we actually mean by the future for us in the short term anyway is a new range of hardware developed specifically for the self-service market. You get a little snapshot of them there. There's some work ongoing around the payment gateway and acquiring arms that we have under the Ingenico banner to provide this full service solution. But that's something we'll be very excited to pick up with you individually. You'll see our email addresses, by the way, as we'll get onto the questions now. But our email addresses, I think, are on the last slide for both Lee and I, and I'm sure some of you may want to even get in touch on LinkedIn and the like. But not to turn this into too much of a spiel about these things, but of course, as Lee said, this just underlines our commitment, and you can always get in touch with us individually to take any conversations forward.
Yeah, so just obviously a thank you for everybody for taking time out today to listen to this. Hopefully there's some bits there that have been useful and interesting for you. Some of the stuff we've covered is obviously going to be a little bit sort of a bit like common sense. Some of it, some of you will be very familiar with. For others of you, maybe less so. What we will do, though, is we'll move on to some of the questions that have been put forward from the audience. Obviously, there's a couple on about sort of some of the technology issues earlier. So, but thank you for sharing those. Apologies for any frustration caused, but it's always good to get feedback, whether it's good, negative, or whatever. So, quite happy for people to sort of provide that input. In terms of, I'll take the first question, then I'll pass across to Darren to take the next one. The first question that I've been asked is, can you please tell us about transaction costs for vending operators? What is it now and where is it heading? Generally, customers will face and have different commercials from different providers. So it's very difficult to be too specific here. With payments is, in my opinion, very much a volume and, a sort of scale game. So, what my expectation is that as volumes and as sales increase and as customers use things more often and cashless adoption continues to grow, I would expect that transaction costs will reduce. Now, when it comes to transaction costs, they can be made up of one or more different parts. So with some of these, and again, there are different models in place from different providers, and sometimes there can be several people providing parts of a solution, but typically you'll end up with acquiring fees and you'll end up with maybe payment service fees or something else. but volume generally helps determine what the rates are. So my view on vending is that as volumes increase, as people start to use the technology more, as more machines get equipped with cashless technology and capability, then my expectation would be that there would be a gradual reduction in fees. But I'm sure others will also have a view on that, dependent on the part of the payment value chain they operate in. Darren, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, sure. And I was just going to add to that. I think, as you kind of indicated, Lee, I think the transparency bit is big there, isn't it? So, as you said, of course, like anything, there'll be different approaches from different providers. But I think what to always look out for is that transparency. You know, can you really see the cost and value of each aspect of your payment solution, be it hardware, the gateway, the acquiring, and you know, is your provider able to explain and share that and help you refine as best you can, help you choose. Yeah, moving on to the next question, which is a very interesting one about connectivity, and essentially asking, you know, that when you think about talking to the machine, telemetry, and indeed, you know, connectivity of the payment terminal itself, that can be a challenge in sort of low signal areas. For sure, it is a challenge in certain locations, of course. You said that apart from installing 4G, is there a better solution? It's quite a specific one to kind of take the generic answer, but I know, speaking for ourselves, that, you know, absolutely the 4G connectivity piece is key and prevalent. And there are options with kind of boosters and different modules that can help, as well as looking at things like kind of delayed transactions, where you can obviously store a level of transactions and push them through when connectivity is resumed. But again, it's quite specific, case to case, really.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to Darren, neither he or I will confess to being networking experts. I have to say, you know, I've had to learn a little bit recently, because I've probably had, like some of you, children off school, you know, working from home, and let's just say they're sort of pretty vocal when it comes to frustrations with internet bandwidth and things like that, particularly if I'm doing calls also. So we can obviously ask internally, because we do have people who look at networking. We do see, obviously, sometimes as well, even in different industries, connectivity challenges related to, if you imagine even having, you know, payment devices in nightclubs that might be underground, you know, where people are trying to serve food and drink. So we do have experience around, you know, networking in different environments. We also supply devices and the payment service for onboard ticketing for some of the train companies, where we have to deal with things such as trains going through tunnels and significant challenges around the number of hours during a day where a payment terminal might actually not be able to establish an online connection. So happy to take questions specifically around that to see if we can help. I'm also, you know, very much aware that, you know, there's a good chance that, you know, several people on this webinar will also actually be using Ingenico technology today, either purchased, you know, direct from us or through one of our partners. So again, you know, I'm absolutely happy to try and offer any support around that. But for Darren and I think it's probably a subject matter that, you know, we're probably best deferring to others on. But thank you for raising it.
Yeah, I think I've certainly exhausted my my background there, Lee. But yeah, I mean, as you say, we've got so many use cases where it's been looked at and addressed in different ways. So very happy to have those conversations based on anyone's particular environment.
Yeah. So. I was just going to say one of the other questions. There's quite a few coming through now, which is good to see. So, in terms of, I'm not going to take the easy one around, can we get a copy of the presentation, please? I will pick up on the one around sort of new technology like Bluetooth and things. One of the things that we're starting to see coming through, and it's been a bit of a challenge for the payment industry, is things like pay on glass. So in years gone by, we've looked at introducing chip and pin terminals where, you know, rather than actually using a physical keypad to actually, you know, type in numbers, you know, just using, you know, a touch screen itself. So there is, you know, sort of movement in that direction for sure, and I'm pretty sure one of our new self-service range caters for that. Previously, one of the challenges around that type of technology used to be that a concern that if somebody, used a touch screen on a PIN pad to make a payment and enter their PIN, that the next person would be able to see what that person had actually pressed by just seeing maybe some residue left over from fingerprints used. But that technology now seems to have been evolved. It looks like it's going to start to, certainly see a lot more investment in it, that's for sure. There's a particular question here around Bluetooth in payment systems. I think, today, in hospitality, we obviously today provide a lot of devices that connect using Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. So using that type of technology to process payments is quite straightforward. We've also found as well, by working with things like beacons and some organisations now, where offers and things are actually getting pushed to people who've got Bluetooth, maybe on discoverable settings on their phone, getting offers actually pushed to them to encourage them to go into a particular store or buy a particular product or service, near to where they are, to try and encourage that footfall. So again, things like that, from a Bluetooth payment perspective, technology is generally there. I think the beacon thing, it comes down to how comfortable people are, being bombarded by messages saying, come here, please come to this point, please come and spend money with me. I'm not sure about it. I'm not overly convinced, I must say. But let's see. Darren, do you want to take another one?
Yeah, sure. I think we've maybe just got time for one more. There are a few questions there, as you said, Lee. One about the presentation, data sheets on some of the Ingenico hardware services we touched on. So again, very, very happy to connect on LinkedIn. You'll have my email address in just a moment in the final slide. I think for things like that, absolutely, please do get in touch, and very happy to have one-to-one conversations. I'll just finish off with just one good question there on the cost of hardware transactions. Is that the real barrier to full contactless adoption, or is it practical and technical? Yeah, really good point. I mean, at the end of the day, there is a physical element to this. It doesn't magically appear in the machine. So, I think that from we think about the ADA and some of the guidance there, the sort of uniformity in terms of the dimensions that hardware is built to and the ease of fitting it. These are certainly for us key guidelines, of course. And I think for those that are already not involved, I mean, there is a range of kind of partners certainly that we work with as well that help in that. So again, it's something we can talk about one-to-one, but it's a really good point. I mean, you have to obviously accept that there is some physical hands-on work to fit machines, to fit terminals to machines, but then the maintenance and ongoing can be much less than perhaps many experience with CoinMech. But yeah, I know that time is just about running out here. So certainly for my part, I'll just say thank you very much to everyone that's joined. It's been a real pleasure to join Lee and speak to you about self-service and cashless. As I say, our email addresses will be coming up just about now. So do please feel free to get in touch. And Lee, I'll just let you close off from your side.
Yeah, and guys, any sort of feedback's welcome. I can see somebody's obviously already put a comment on there, so yeah, okay, thanks for that. There is a few questions we've not got to around things like hygiene, so happy to take those offline. Clearly, in addition to vending, we've got a lot of terminals in lots of places that people are looking to use, so we have provided some guidance around that. So, again, very receptive to, receiving questions and, people asking for what do you think type, points being put forward to us. I hope it's been useful. Thank you all, for giving up an hour of your time today. It is much appreciated. And like I said, if Darren or I can help with anything, then feel free to make contact with us. So thank you.
Okay, so that comes to the end of our session, and if it's all right with you, Darren and Lee, we'll bring the session to a close. But before we do, I'd just like to thank you both for joining us today with that very insightful presentation. Just a reminder that the webinar will also be available to review via Vending International's website, and you can expect a courtesy follow-up email from Ingenico in the next few days. So all that's left for me to say is thank you for logging into the session, and have a good day.